Namaskaram friends. So let's discuss some excerpt from the book Nexus. Topic is weaponizing information. In 2016, I published Homo Deus, a book that highlighted some of the dangers posed to humanity by the new information technologies. That book argued that the real hero of history has always been information rather than Homo sapiens, and that scientists increasingly understand not just history but also biology, politics, and economics in terms of information flows. Animals, states, and markets are all information networks, absorbing data from the environment, making decisions, and releasing data back. The book warned that while we hope better information technology will give us health, happiness, and power, it may actually take power away from us and destroy both our physical and our mental health. Homo Deus hypothesized that if humans aren't careful, we might dissolve within the torrent of information like a clump of earth within a gushing river, and that in the grand scheme of things, humanity will turn out to have been just a ripple within the cosmic data flow. In the years since Homo Deus was published, the pace of change has only accelerated and power has indeed been shifting from humans to algorithms. Many of the scenarios that sounded like science fiction in 2016, such as algorithms that can create art, masquerades as human beings, make crucial life decisions about us and know more about us than we know about ourselves, are everyday realities in 2024. Many other things have changed since 2016. The ecological crisis has intensified, international tensions have escalated, and a populist wave has undermined the cohesion of even the most robust democracies. Populism has also mounted a radical challenge to the naive view of information. Populist leaders such as Donald Trump and Jair Bolsonaro, and populist movements and conspiracy theories such as QAnon and the anti-vaxxers have argued that all traditional institutions that gain authority by claiming to gather information and discover truth are simply lying. Bureaucrats, judges, doctors, mainstream journalists, and academic experts are elite cabals that have no interest in the truth and are deliberately spreading disinformation to gain power and privileges for themselves at the expense of the people. The rise of politicians like Trump and the movements like QAnon has a specific political context, unique to the conditions of the United States in the late 2010s. But populism as an anti-establishment worldview long predated Trump and is relevant to numerous other historical contexts now and in the future. In a nutshell, populism view information as a weapon. Information lead to power. So the populist view of information flow like information move towards power. In its more extreme versions, populism posits that there is no objective truth at all and that everyone has their own truth, which they will to vanquish rivals. According to this worldview, power is the only reality. All social interactions are power struggles because humans are interested only in power. The claim to be interested in something else like truth or justice is nothing more than a ploy to gain power. Whenever and wherever populism succeeds in disseminating the view of information as a weapon, language itself is undermined. Nouns like facts and adjectives like accurate and truthful become elusive. Such words are not taken as pointing to a common objective reality. Rather, any talk of facts or truth is bound to prompt at least some people to ask whose facts and whose truth are you referring to. It should be stressed that this power focused and deeply skeptical view of information isn't a new phenomenon and it wasn't invented by anti vaxxers, flat earthers, Bolsonarists, or Trump supporters. Similar views were propagated long before 2016, including by some of humanity's brightest minds. In the late 20th century, for example, intellectuals from the radical left like Michael Foucault and Edward Said claimed that scientific institutions like clinics and universities are not pursuing timeless and objective truth but are instead using power to determine what counts as truth in the service of capitalists and colonialist elites. These radical critics occasionally went as far as arguing that scientific facts are nothing more than a capitalist or colonialist discourse and that people in power can never be really interested in truth and can never be trusted to recognize and correct their own mistakes. This particular line of radical leftist thinking goes back to Karl Marx, who argued in the mid 19th century that power is the only reality, that information is a weapon, and that elites who claim to be serving truth and justice are in fact pursuing narrow class privileges. In the words of the 1848 Communist Manifesto, the history of all hitherto existing scientists or societies, sorry, the history of the all hitherto existing societies is the history of class struggles. Free man and slave, patrician and plebeian, lord and serf, guildmaster and journeyman, in a word, oppressor and oppressed stood in constant opposition to one another, carried on an uninterrupted, now hidden, now open fight. This binary interpretation of history implies that every human interaction is a power struggle between oppressor and oppressed. Accordingly, whenever anyone says anything, the question to ask isn't what is being said, is it true, but rather who is saying this, whose privileges does it serve. Of course, right wing populists such as Trump and Bolsonaro are unlikely to have read Foucault or Marx and indeed present themselves as fiercely anti Marxist. They also greatly differ from Marxists in their suggested policies in fields like taxation and welfare, but their basic view of society and of information is surprisingly Marxist, seeing all human interactions as a power struggle between oppressor and oppressed. For example, in his inaugural address in 2017, Trump announced that a small group in our nation's capital has reaped the rewards of government while the people have borne the cost. Such rhetoric is a staple of populism, which the political scientist Cass Mudde has described as an ideology that considers society to be ultimately separated into two homogeneous and antagonistic groups, the pure people versus the corrupt elite. Just as Marxists claim that the media function as a mouthpiece for the capitalist class and that scientific institutions like universities spread disinformation in order to perpetuate capitalist control, populists accuse these same institutions of working to advance the interest of the corrupt elites at the expense of the people. Present day populists also suffer from the same incoherence that plagued radical anti establishment movements in previous generations. If power is the only reality and if information is just a weapon, what does it imply about the populists themselves? Are they too interested only in power and are they too lying to us to gain power? Populists have sought to extricate themselves from this conundrum in two different ways. Some populist movements claim adherence to the ideals of modern science and to the traditions of skeptical empiricism. They tell people that indeed you should never trust any institutions or figures of authority, including self proclaimed populist parties and politicians. Instead, you should do your own research and trust only what you can directly observe by yourself. This radical empiricist position implies that while large scale institutions like political parties, courts, newspapers, and universities can never be trusted, individuals who make the effort can still find the truth by themselves. This approach may sound scientific and may appeal to free spirited individuals, but it leave open the question of how human communities can cooperate to build healthcare systems or pass environmental regulations which demand large scale institutional organizations. Is a single individual capable of doing all the necessary research to decide whether Earth's climate is heating up and what should be done about it? How would a single person go about collecting climate data from throughout the world, not to mention obtaining reliable records from past centuries? Trusting only my own research may sound scientific, but in practice, it amounts to believing that there is no objective truth. As we shall see in the next chapter, science is a collaborative institutional effort rather than a personal quest. An alternative populist solution is to be abandon the modern scientific ideal of finding the truth via research and instead go back to relying on divine revelation or mysticism. Traditional religion like Christianity, Islam, and Hinduism have typically characterized humans as untrustworthy, power hungry creatures who can access the truth only thanks to the intervention of a divine intelligence. In the 2010s and early 2020s, populist parties from Brazil to Turkey and from the United States to India have aligned themselves with such traditional religions. They have expressed radical doubt about modern institutions while declaring complete faith in ancient scriptures. The populists claim that the articles you read in the New York Times or in Science are just an elitist ploy to gain power. But what you read in the Bible, the Quran, or the Vedas is absolute truth. A variation on this theme calls on people to put their trust in charismatic leaders like Trump and Bolsonaro, who are depicted by their supporters either as the messenger of God or as possessing a mystical bond with the people, while ordinary politicians lie to the people in order to gain power for themselves. The charismatic leader is the infallible mouthpiece of the people who exposes all the lies. One of the recurrent paradoxes of populism is that it starts by warning us that all human elites are driven by a dangerous hunger for power, but often ends by entrusting all power to a single ambitious human. We will explore populism in great depth in the next chapter, but at this point, it is important to note that populists are eroding trust in large scale institutions and international cooperation just when humanity confronts the existential challenges of ecological collapse, global war, and out of control technology. Instead of trusting complex human institutions, populists give us the same advice as the Pantheon myth and the Socrates apprentice. Trust God or the great sorcerer to intervene and make everything right again. If we take this advice, we will likely find ourselves in the short term under the thumb of the worst kind of power hungry humans, and in the long term under the thumb of a new AI overlords. Or we might find ourselves nowhere at all as Earth becomes inhospitable for human life. If we wish to avoid relinquishing power to a charismatic leader or an instructable AI, we must first gain a better understanding of what information is, how it helps to build human networks, and how it relates to truth and power. Populists are right to the suspicious of the naive view of information, but they are wrong to think that power is the only reality and that information is always a weapon. Information isn't the raw material of truth, but it isn't a mere weapon either. There is enough space between these extremes for a more nuanced and hopeful view of human information networks and of our ability to handle power wisely. This book is dedicated to exploring that middle ground. So, this is all about this discussion. I hope you love it, you enjoy it. Namaskaram.